Hello and welcome to Health Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we could dive into the world of health and fitness. We learn overcome adversity to pick back first addiction and see health and fitness in a whole new light. That was totally just all out there at once. Really excited, guys, to talk about to today's guest something that you wouldn't even think about. Hey, those are muscles in my body and I need to use it. And kind of speaking of totally off the cuff and just a random side note of something I noticed, doing a lot of working with a photographer recently, and we're trying to take pictures for branding and et cetera, et cetera. And they always want you to do bicep curls. It's always bicep curls. It's always something because, like, for some reason, that's working out. It's, hey, this is a picture of me doing a barbell bicep curl. So I just thought that was pretty funny, talking about muscles that everybody hits. But today we're going to talk about the hands, how important they are. I use them every single day, all the time. So I think it's important to talk about, avoid some common injuries I see, especially carpal tunnel. So without further ado, let's welcome today's guest, Dr. Terry Zachary. Terry, it's a pleasure to have you on today.
Hey, Anthony. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I don't know if you liked my little imagery. It's always bicep curls when photographers are taking pictures or you're doing promotions of gyms. I feel like that or battle ropes. Like, pick one.
You know what? I think you gave a good introduction into what we're going to talk about today, too, and why it's so unnoticed.
Yeah, because you're not going to, I mean, how often do you see people doing hand exercises to promote a gym?
Exactly.
Never.
Well,
So,
never.
yeah, never. So, with that, just a quick question for you. Just how did you get into working with the hands in the first place? What got you in this field?
You know, Anthony, it's it's not anything I really had picked out at any stretch, but I grew up a sports junkie, and grip was always something. I grew up, I'm a Canadian, so I grew up with hockey first. And it was always grip strength was always important to win the puck battles and whatnot. And then later on, I got into golf. Uh, Also, whereas strong hands are a great benefit in many situations, and you need to be able to actually relax your hands to hit a golf club, but you still need that hand strength to be in control of the golf club when you do relax. And then basketball was my probably final love, but golf won out when I got into college. So when I made my decision as far as my vocation, I loved the study. I loved the intricacy of golf. So I started studying the body, and it was a natural fit to go into sports chiropractic. But I never lost the dream of playing on the professional tour. And when I got into practice, I decided, one last run at it. So I took 3 years off and played mini tours all over the States and a little bit in Canada. And I did not make the PGA Tour, Anthony, just a little heads up, but I saw dozens and dozens of repetitive grip injuries, which I had worked on in practice. For some reason, I took a real love towards it, and I saw the flaws right away. And that led me to trying to figure out a way to exercise grip that wasn't demanding 5, 6, 7 exercises with 2, 3, 4 different items. And so I developed a product. And then as I got out of golf back into practice, we started work with grip athletes, musicians, gamers, workplace injuries, hobbyists, you name it, anybody involved in grip. And we've been at that for 15 plus years, and I really know the insides of it and the outsides. And I think it's hugely overlooked.
A very interesting story. Hockey to golf. My first thought, and this is where my brain goes, is Happy Gilmore. So,
Absolutely. Hey, yeah. My kids just saw Happy Gilmore for the first time. They loved it.
well, what a great movie.
Yeah.
But that's my first mind went. And I couldn't agree more. Is grip strength plays such a pivotal role in a lot of sports, especially anything you have to hold something like tennis or hockey, like you said, golf, like you said. Anything that requires any kind of grip strength to make a connection to a pull. So I totally get that. And then when you were talking a little bit about where it's utilized and the places that a lot of people see it, just personally from a business standpoint, because I know I have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen, what your dad told you when you were young is so true. A grip strength defines your success.
It's actually really interesting, and there's, in our modern times, there's many studies. There's probably a half a dozen big studies that show that grip strength is directly correlated with like life. It's just interesting, as we all know, the more fit you are, the more active you are, the better blood flow, etc. You get muscle tone and muscle balance. It's helpful in so many ways, but a strong handshake is always something you kind of enjoy seeing. You get a little bit of a feel for the person, and I think our fitness has many ways of speaking to our world, for sure.
Yeah, I heard everything, but just mine is grip strength is directly correlated to it, and he just broke out for a second. So what was that?
Yeah, so there's been there's 5 big studies, and there's another one that they cited in the Washington Post in January about grip strength being directly correlated to life longevity.
Gotcha.
We could talk about that, but there's many reasons for it. But lots that we've discovered on our own. I was glad to see those studies because it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, if grip strength correlation doesn't mean causation, as everyone knows, but if you can correlate grip strength to being more successful, which we've talked about briefly, and then being successful correlates to longevity because you have more access to healthcare and healthier options. So then you can say if A plus B equals like A equals B, then B equals C, then A equals C. So
Yeah.
you have that direct line to it right there. And the second half of it, which is probably more relatable to the mass public, is we're turning more and more onto computers. Like everyone has a desk job. Most people, some people work from home. Some people just go to a place just to sit in front of a computer, and everything is done there. Which carpal tunnel, I know you mentioned briefly, but huge. I can't tell you how many people have tendonitis and carpal tunnel.
It's an enormous, it's an enormous problem that we have, and we've actually had the product that I developed was used in a study to show how to reduce carpal tunnel and to actually reverse it. And it's one of the things we've never looked at, Anthony, is like, what is the carpal tunnel? How many people even know what the carpal tunnel is, what the structure's like? How do you make it thrive? And I can tell you, it's easy to explain as we get into it, how to make the carpal tunnel thrive. But the only thing we know about the carpal tunnel is carpal tunnel syndrome. It's not a fun thing to talk about because, usually you're past any kind of wellness situation, but carpal tunnel is a direct reflection of imbalanced grip and imbalanced hand and grip muscles.
So let's start there, right? Because I mean, tendonitis is, I guess, the preliminary cause that's going to eventually lead into carpal tunnel, just from what I know of it. But I want you to explain it a little better. So, what are some signs, symptoms of tendonitis leading into carpal tunnel syndrome, which then eventually people leads into surgery? So it's a whole process.
Yeah. So Anthony, carpal tunnel syndrome is it's not quite so simple as a tendonitis. There's many. It's kind of it's almost a perfect storm. What happens first of all, though, is if you can, I'll put my hand up so you can see as well. So especially when we're gripping smaller items. So somebody that knits, maybe an artist, somebody like that, smaller items, dental hygienists, very common. You see that the muscles that attach, the opposition muscles of the thumb and the flexor muscles of the thumb actually attach onto the top of the carpal tunnel, as well as on the other side, the small flexor of the pinky and the opposer of the pinky attach there as well. So you can see that anytime I do that, if you look at the cleavage right there, you can see that carpal tunnel just shutting right down. It's not that difficult to see. What we need to do, and then yet we've been taking stuff, if we grip during our day, and then if we're going to exercise, we often will take something and squeeze it more. Well, it's like telling somebody with bad posture to slouch more, and that should work. It just doesn't work. So when we use the product, we have people close against a ball and then open and spread against a cord. So now we train the abductor, the spreading muscles, to be strong. And now all of a sudden that supports the carpal tunnel. So basically, whatever we're doing in anything, we're going to have, repetitive imbalances in almost every activity we do during the day. We have to just acknowledge that and do something to oppose it so that we walk away in a strong neutral position. And carpal tunnel syndrome, that's what we talk about a lot, is if the muscles are closing. And by the way, on the tendonitis, to get back, you do have 8 of the finger flexor tendons right coming through that carpal tunnel, which is as big as your thumb, basically. And as we're gripping with those, especially when we're gripping in the carpal tunnel shut, and then if we put the wrist in flexion, which is a lot of times, poor ergonomic situation, then we have those flexor tendons. We also have a thumb flexor tendon going through that carpal tunnel. So you have 9 tendons, and if they're all flexing, especially if the wrist is flexed, now there's a great chance of causing a tendonitis within there. Then you get the swelling, and then we have real problems. But the last thing I'll say about carpal tunnel syndrome is when we respect the way that the carpal tunnel is built, and we exercise through a full range of motion, closing and opening and spreading, we also stimulate maximum blood flow, maximum lymph drainage. So the fluid flow through the carpal tunnel is also healthy. And so you need to maintain it. You need to maintain that carpal tunnel as wide as possible, make it thrive, and stimulate proper fluid flow through it. And that's how you keep it healthy. But if we're just going to take things and repetitively grip them and not do anything to offset that, we're going to keep on seeing it like we do.
Yeah, so it's poor ergonomics when it comes to typing on a computer. And I know this might be a little mundane for people, but what is proper ergonomics?
Well, I'd say actually that's a really good question. For a nerd like me that's been at this with the hand muscles for a long time, it's actually a really good question because we talk to people a lot. So ideally, when you approach a computer, you want to have, again, I'm not sitting in a position where I could show it in the camera, but you want to have everything as neutral as possible. So your posture neutral. And then you want to have your forearm. I'm going to lift my shoulder, which isn't right. But if my shoulder was down here, I would like to see my forearms to be neutral. If I'm flexed, then we're talking about that problem I told you. We're going to have the tendons going through that carpal tunnel really at stress. But if I'm in extension, it's going to cause problems on the extensor side. Okay. So we want to be neutral, but that's usually where it stops, Anthony, when we talk about ergonomics. Positioning. But I will remind you is that you're now, when we're typing at a computer, you're neutral, but remember, gravity is trying to push your fingers down. So when I go to flex, the flexor muscles are actually going with gravity, but let's think of these extensor muscles are holding the fingers up the whole time as we're striking and holding. So really your extensor surface is contracting the whole time when you're typing. It's way more physical of an activity as we think it is. We think, you're just typing, who cares? But you're actually, say a keyboard player is the same as typing, your palms down. So you're actually holding those fingers up the whole time, which affects the whole mechanics of the grip because your hand opening muscles support the muscles that flex. When they get tired, you're going to see the whole kind of kinetic chain of grip breaks down. But you see a lot of tennis elbow, and because of the flexion and tired flexion, you can definitely see some carpal tunnel as well.
Yeah, and I see it a lot in my industry for people coming to me. When you could take your finger, put it right top of your forearm, push, and that's the most painful spot for people. It's like, found it.
It's on you go onto the extensor surface side. Anytime somebody does something palm down, you can go, if you see a pianist or somebody that's working on the computer a lot or a gamer, you can come right up and even go onto that lateral epicondyle and poke, and they'll be hot as anything because they've been statically contracting in their workplace or in their activity for so long, but they're not taking that muscle through its full range of motion. So how is it going to be? It's like holding a bicep. It's like holding a brick up like this and saying, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm training my bicep. Well, no, you're not. You have to take it through its full range of motion if you want to train it properly. But when we're doing this, all the extensor muscles in the back of that forearm are just contracting statically.
So besides overuse, what are some simple things that people can do to watch out for carpal tunnel syndrome or tendonitis?
Yeah, I think when we talk about anything in grip, I mean, I'm a big fan of exercise and of fitness, but you can't, when sometimes people say, well, I want to be exercising, but it's that old scenario that you probably see where the young kids go to the gym and they want to impress the girls with the big chest, and then that's all they do is they do the chest and they do the biceps that you were talking about earlier, because that's what people can see. But often they will, when they start, until they get, until they see the imbalance, they won't do their back, they won't do their triceps as much. But that's one of the things I would say for anything grip wise. The big criticism is it used to be you would take something and squeeze it. Okay. And that's through the time that I spent on the professional golf tours. These guys who are gripping all the time would either do nothing for their hand exercise. So for their hand muscle strength and health, they would either do nothing or they were taking something and squeezing it. And when you ask about how do you maintain this area, we have to get out of this mentality. You talk about Fitness Redefined, which I love the brand because this fits. I mean, we're perfect for that, because we have to redefine hand exercise. If we continue to do this, you'll continue to end up in offices like mine where we're working on these problems that were completely preventable. So we have to look at what grip is. We have to understand it. Grip is 9 muscles that close the hand, supported by those 9 muscles that open the hand that are located generally in the back. But there's actually also, Anthony, there's 9 muscles that control the position of your wrist and forearm as well that have to be trained. So we have to learn that hand exercise is training the muscles that close, training the muscles that open, and then training the forearm muscles as well. And the product we developed, we have an exercise called a figure 8 exercise, where instead of getting an athlete, a busy athlete or busy musician or busy worker, to have a bunch of stuff laying around, we just have them close against the ball of the product, open and spread against the cord of the product. And while their hands open, they will go through a figure 8 motion that couples the flexion, the extension, the pronation, the supination, and the lateral and medial deviation of the wrist. So we're able to train that whole thing just like we would do any other area of your body. If you're going to do chest, you would do back. If you're going to do biceps, you do triceps. What we're saying with grip is a little bit unique. You have to train the muscles that close and the muscles that open, because they're all being used. And then you have to train those forearm muscles. So at the end of the day, you walk away strong and balanced.
Yeah. And speaking of balance, guys, just want to introduce you to our company, F Squared Consulting. If you haven't already, go check it out. It is www.fitbodiesfatwallets.com. And what is it, Anthony? Well, like I told you over and over again on this show, I came together with a power partner, Keith. Keith is a financial person who's going to teach you how to get out of debt. What's the difference between a 401k and a Roth IRA? Where should I be putting my money? As an entrepreneur, I'm all lost in my personal finances. Please help me and teach me what to do. He's going to take care of that. I came in and said, you know what? Finances are great, but your fitness is going to take it to a whole nother level. And that's not just physical fitness, that is mental fitness. So we're going to look at your nutrition. We're going to figure out workouts for you. We're going to get you situated in life so you could focus on your business, and we could take everything in your personal life and make it one stream going forward. Guys, I can't put it out that this is something you need to look into. So yet again, FitBodiesFatWallets.com. It's F Squared Consulting. Keith and I were offering all podcast listeners 10% off of all of our service. Go check it out today. Thank you so much for all your support. Going into different types of movements for your wrists, like you talked about with your machine and everything. My brain went to basically how I work out, right? So I do for doing that. I think I told someone I've recorded over like 10,000 workouts in my life, which is pretty crazy. But the grips that we hold doing different exercise. So I'm just going to pick something simple like a lap hold down or a pull up. It's basically the same thing. You can do a grip this way with your palms facing away from you. You could do palms facing towards you. You could do palms facing towards each other. And then you can vary how you're gripping. Thumb grabbing underneath, thumb grabbing under top. And especially with pull-ups, I work a lot on finger pull-ups. So only hitting the top of your fingers this way, pounding it down from 5 to 4 and really seeing how much grip strength you could add into your fingers. But it's something I did without thinking about, oh, this is going to avoid X, Y, Z and prevent these injuries. It was just like, oh, let's make these exercises harder. And I need to hit every variation of this kind of workout. Is that something that's also going to help?
Yeah, very interesting question. So, Anthony, what I would say to that is that your grip position is it's a very appropriate question for what we just talked about, because your grip is not just the fingers. It is. So we used to think that grip is just my finger flexors. I grab here, that's all I have to worry about. But if I grab here, the way that the mechanics and the kinetic chain of grip is when I'm gripping this, my finger extensor muscles are contracting statically. It's a co-contraction. So when I grip this, if everything was loose back here, I'd just grip it and there would be nothing back there. Okay. So it's a co-contraction. So every time you grip, your finger flexor muscles are grabbing, yes, your thumb muscles, we can see that. But what we don't recognize is these are also contracting too, your finger extensor muscles, and they attach at the lateral elbow. Okay. So we're creating static muscles back here that are eventually going to cause problems. Think tennis elbow, think some of the forearm extensor tendonitis and wrist extensor tendonitis. So that's the first thing I would say is that. Now, the second thing I would say is that whenever we grip something, now all of a sudden it's the position of the forearm is going to stress different muscles in our forearm. So you talked about if I'm gripping front or if I'm gripping back, we're just going to isolate different muscles in the forearm. And that's why I say grip is 27 muscles. It's the 9 that close, it's the 9 that open, and it's the 9 in your wrist, forearm, and elbow that control the position of your wrist. So as you're changing around, as you're moving around, that's what's going to change the muscles that you work. But in the long term, how do we want your grip muscles to be? How do we want those 27 muscles to be? We want them to be strong and long and balanced. Okay. So the reason I like that question so much is that you're asking about different wrist positions as we grip. We can be neutral, we can be more into what I would call supination, or we can be more into what I call pronation. It's going to stress different areas of the wrist, forearm, and elbow. Just like I used to treat hockey players like crazy when we first started out, they would have certain wrist injuries because of the lie of their hockey stick. Okay, that they would favor certain wrist areas, and pretty soon that wrist area gets overworked and they have problems. We would start to train them by saying, hey, Billy, if you're going to play hockey and you're going to have that angle of your wrist, at the end of the day, you're going to have to do an exercise that rebalances that. Okay. Just like I'll say, what's a good example? A guitar player. A guitar player has a certain position of their wrist all the time too. And if that's all they do is play guitar, at the end of the day, they're going to have shortened muscles on that side of their wrist. And that's going to be an imbalanced wrist. They're going to have injuries. There's just injuries in all these repetitive grip activities. So at the end of the day, we just have to acknowledge that any grip is going to be in imbalance. We have to train the grip through full range of motion, the 9 that close, the 9 that open, and the 9 that support the wrist. So it doesn't matter your activity. If I'm in the gym and I'm grabbing a bar, and that's going to be my resistance, I have to recognize that I'm closing that hand all the time. Okay. And I have to recognize that forearm is going to be in a certain position all the time. And as I do that day in, day out, which is great for the rest of your body, okay, the hands are going to build into a repetitive grip injury. The wrists are going to build into the imbalance that you are asking it to do every day. We have to train those 27 muscles through a full range of motion so that we walk away from the gym with a strong, healthy body with good blood flow, but also with strong, healthy hands, wrists, forearms, elbows, carpal tunnels, etc. So the body can walk away looking good and balanced. And I'm such a fitness fan. You just have to, if you're going to have a long, healthy life where you're productive, you have to stay in shape. But what happens at the end of the day is we'll usually get these almost Lego hand looking things because we forget, who cares about the balance of the hands though? We care about the balance of the hands because that parlays into finger and thumb and wrist and carpal tunnel and elbow problems. So that's the thing we want to talk to you about. No matter how you're gripping, you're always gripping. And so you have to do something to walk away with those hand muscles strong and balanced.
I think I want to talk about two common injuries that, well, one's not so common, one's super common. Besides what we mentioned previously, the first one's trigger finger. You hear that word thrown around a lot. I've seen a couple clients with it. But for those that don't know, first off, what is trigger finger? What causes it? And then what can we do to help get rid of it?
Yeah, it's not such an easy one to deal with, but I can tell you in general, trigger finger comes a lot when we have some type of, I will say at some point you're going to get some type of a nodule. Now it can be from there's lots of theories about it. There's theories. Is it hereditary, where you get like a palmar fasciitis situation where the palms have nodules basically. But when you get a slight nodule, it could be from a micro injury that actually repairs and it's fibrotic. And then eventually the flexor tendon will not be able to go through the hood anymore. And that flexor will be trapped into a flexion situation. Okay. It'll happen with the fingers. It's common with palmar fasciitis, which is Dupuytren's contracture is what it's called, the situation. But when there's a trigger finger and it's an active trigger finger, a couple of things. Those are ones I don't recommend surgery as a first option very often. But sometimes if the nodule's been built, that nodule is going to have to be removed. And then we again ask the question, how did it get to be that way? That's the thing. And when we're looking for, even in a Dupuytren situation, the body works best when you take it through its full natural range of motion. And what that means, what I mean by that, Anthony, to explain that comment out a little more, is that when I take the hand through its full natural range of motion, my body says, hey, Terry's now taking his hand through that full range of motion. I better open up blood flow, open up lymph drainage, and make that area really efficient, because our body will adapt to the environment we give it every day. And in a Dupuytren's contraction situation, which is palmar fasciitis, then I like to see nice blood flow. Again, you talked about diet and stuff like that. I like to see good diet, make sure good nutrients are coming there, making sure breathing is nice and healthy so you're getting oxygen, and then full range of motion exercises so the body can naturally get the proper nutrients there and get the waste and byproducts out of there. So, but for the trigger finger itself, if there's a nodule, a lot of times it has to go to a surgeon, get the nodule taken out. It's not a difficult surgery. And then again, get back to properly taking care of the hands so these things don't reoccur.
Yeah, and they're kind of related, which was my second one, which I don't know if it's overly common, but I'm pretty sure it's genetic, but I don't know if there's a way to prevent it. I don't know the proper name, but it's called Viking syndrome. If you've heard of that. So the hands come and they're here and they get stuck and they can't open the hands whatsoever. I have a couple clients that had it.
Okay.
And some were in dentistry. So I really think that was a common cause of it, was dentistry being yanking things out in that grip. Or
Yeah.
they can't move their hands. Like, for those that are listening to audio, basically just your hands are flexed. And over time, they come together as it slowly breaks in. You know anything about it? If not, it's okay. It's a tough.
No, it's hey, I don't run into too many terms that I haven't heard of. So we're always learning. So I don't know that term specifically, but again, I would venture to guess. I'm trying to think of how I can set an analogy. Somebody that, say, when you're riding on a motorbike all day. Okay, if I rode on a motorbike all day and pretty soon I take my hands out, well, it's hard to straighten your hands back out, because your body why would your body be efficient through its full range of motion? Because you've been holding the motorbike handles all day. So I don't know that I've ever heard that description of it, which is always interesting to me. But the Viking syndrome or condition, I have to think it's, again, a repetitive grip situation. We see many variations of that. But yet, I'll take it to even something that would be very familiar to you, Anthony, again, and I'll take it to that the kid that comes in and he works the chest and he's doing butterflies all day, and the chest is getting good and solid, but he doesn't do anything to oppose it. Well, he's going to come in with a, I guess, basic Viking formation where he's going to be flexed until he feels the ribs and the low back and everything have problems. That's my guess on it. I'd love to research it more, but anytime that we see the body's not going through its full range of motion, that's usually an adaptation. Okay. And it's an adaptation to poor physical habits, usually, and nothing done to understand the area to offset the habit. Just like a golfer, professional golfers, you can tell if you look at all the professional golfers on TV, most of them, if they're a left-handed golfer, will have the left shoulder low. And if they're a right-handed golfer, they'll have the right shoulder low. They've
Very true.
adapted into their repetition. And that's what I see commonly. And dentists is one of the most common repetitive grip injury fields. Dental hygienists, actually the most, where you see careers end well before, not by choice, but because of injury, because of all this repetitive gripping and posture problems. So these are things that we have to understand. What is neutral in the body, which we generally do with the spine, but with the hands, it's like we've forgotten about them. And if I'm going to be repetitive gripping, I can tell you're going to run into problems eventually. And you also run into performance problems day in, day out. So you want to keep your body thriving. So if those 27 muscles in that kinetic chain of grip are all healthy and long and strong with good blood flow, boom, you're going to be a better guitar player, a better dental hygienist, a better golfer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, better gamer. So we want to tell people the hands are no different than any other part of your body. You have to understand them, and you have to realize when you're doing repetition that's going to bring you into imbalance, and then you either quit or you do something to offset them. And we're saying, here's some easy way to offset them.
Love it. I'm going to ask you more of a fun question because it's every parent's worst nightmare. Cracking of the knuckles, good, bad?
Oh man, we're getting into that. Well, what do I think? There's never a reason to really, I'll say, pop a joint or let the gas go out of the knuckles unless you're making a correction. Okay, so that's always good. Now you're getting into chiropractic questions here, but if there's not, you'll see that every time that the gas releases from a joint, and there's studies a long time back that show that you'll have an endorphin release when that happens. So an endorphin release, so people say, oh man, that feels better. That feels better. But at the end of the day, it's the other thing is we're not trying to feel better. Okay, you can go out and have a beer if you want to feel better. What we're trying to do in chiropractic is bring the body into alignment, into stability. So with any kind of, when there's a release of that gas for the joint, you're going to get an endorphin release. So it might feel better even if you bring it into imbalance. Do you see what I mean? So but if you bring it into imbalance, you're going to eventually notice a problem. What we're trying to do is when we adjust a joint, it has to be corrective. We don't just pop a joint just for, that'll feel better. It will feel better in the short term because of the endorphins.
Yeah, I love it. So, Terry, I'm going to ask you the final two questions I ask everybody on this show just to wrap things up. The first one, if you were to summarize this episode in 1 or 2 sentences, what would be your take-home message?
My take-home message is treat grip like any other part of your body. You don't allow your body to get into imbalance. Treat grip like any other part of your body. It's just a more complicated area because 27 muscles rather than biceps, triceps, 2 muscle groups. We have to pay attention because we use in our hands all the time, but we have to keep them strong, long, and balanced with good blood flow.
I love it. And then the easiest question of all, how can people find you, get a hold of you, give us all the stuff?
Yeah, they can go to our website is doczac.com, doczac.com. And my email, the email that would get to me if there's any questions is info@doczac.com. And I answer all the questions that come to me, especially if they're related to mechanics or health questions or fitness questions.
I love it. Dr. Terry, thank you for coming on. And thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of Health Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever-changing field. And remember, fitness is medicine. Until next time.